Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video, we're going to be talking about a modal. We're going to be building a modal from scratch using Framer Motion. It's going to animate on, it's going to mount and unmount, and it's the type of thing that you could take with you from project to project. Super cool. So let's get started right now. Okay, so in this video, we are going to be taking on the challenge of building a modal using the tools and techniques that we've already learned. Now, if you would like to take this as a challenge, because I love to give challenges, if you would like to take this as a challenge, please go ahead, pause this video, and attempt to get a modal working, animating on and off without watching the remainder of this video. It's very possible because everything that we're going to be doing in this video is going to be something that you've already learned. It's just put into a more practical use case than toggling the words super cool. Which by all means is fine. But I want you to put some of your skills to the test at this point and give this a try. And what we're going to be doing is taking our own approach. So if you want to try to do that, feel free to pause. If you just want to follow along, that's cool too. What I'm going to be doing first is heading to our code. Now we have our is toggled, and that's pretty cool. And we're going to keep this is toggled as the toggle for whatever we're doing here with our modal. However, we are going to change things up just a little bit. And let me even move this into a more full screen so we have a lot more room here. I'm going to create a new file so we can have a modal.js. Now, we're not going to be mounting this outside of the normal sort of render position because that's something that you can certainly do with modals, and I do that personally, but it's not really worth it for this minor of an example, and it really doesn't change things at all. So we're going to need to import and animate presence. Okay, so we have animate presence and motion are going to be our two components that we're bringing in. We also need to import React from React, the standard stuff. And we're going to create a new component. Const modal is equal to, and I'm going to have some props in here, so I'll leave this as an object. And we're going to simply return, and we're going to return and animate presence. Okay, so we can say, let's straight up return and animate presence here like this. And we're going to have our is toggled. And this is going to be like so. And inside of here, we're going to have simply just some things. And I'm going to, right now, leave this as a fragment here. And in fact, we could just have a div in here as well for funds. Okay, actually, even let's put a button. Keep going. Just a close button here, just so we have something in here. Now, obviously, there's some things wrong. We need to import, and then by import, I mean utilize a prop named is toggled, which you'd imagine will be coming into this component. And we're also going to want to bring in the children because we want to be able to wrap this around some stuff, okay? And in fact, you could now even toss this children down here like so, like this. Now, next thing we want to do is let's come down here and we're going to export default modal. Okay. So this is our modal component. Quick save. Obviously, there are some things here that need to be changed. We're not utilizing motion just yet. Is toggle needs to come in as a prop as well as children, but this should allow us to at least have a little bit going here. We also need to add some CSS to this, which we can do with styled components. I'm going to head back to our app.js and we're going to import something. We're going to import modal from /modal. Okay. This is a nice little technique here. You can reuse this code in any of your projects. We have our own modal code that functions just like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this modal and I'm going to wrap it around. We're going to wrap it around one of these cards. Actually, I take that back. We're going to have the modal here and then we're going to duplicate one of the cards because I want to keep these cards as they are. Don't want to mess with these too much just yet. And we're going to paste this modal in here like so. This way our purple card is twice. Okay, so far what's going on here is that we're passing a component into a modal, and that modal is simply going to wrap it in an animate presence is toggled as well as this stuff here. Now, one thing you'll notice here when we first load this is that nothing is going to change, specifically because is toggled is always going to be false, considering we're not passing it in. So let's go ahead and change that. We can say is toggled is actually going to be equal to the property that we're passing in as is toggled. I'm going to actually get rid of this H2 stuff, okay? We no longer need this super cool to animate. We're going to send you back to the realm of being a boring old H2 super cool. You're no longer just, you're kind of cool now, I guess. Okay, let's save this. Okay. And the next thing we want to do up here is take our is toggled value from the hook, from the button that we have. Okay, and let's scroll down and pass this in directly here. So we're using that same button, that same is toggled button that we were using to toggle super cool, but now we're going to be toggling the modal itself, which doesn't have any CSS. You can see it is by default. I think it is by default. We were doing ones and zeros before to work with opacity. Let's get rid of this. By default, it is set to true. We're going to say now that this is set to false, okay? Since we're only using the true or false. And instead of this whole pre-value thing that we were doing before, right here on line 35 of my code where we were setting the toggle, we're now simply just going to say, hey, just do the opposite of the previous value. Just whatever it was, just do the opposite. This is going to be way easier than doing that whole ones and zeros thing that we were doing for opacities. So here we have a toggle that's going on and off. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to linger on this. I'll show you the code a little bit more. We're doing our set toggle hook that we did before. It's now using the toggle as a Boolean rather than a 0 or a 1. And next down here, the button is now going to simply take the previous state and give us the inverse of it. Next thing we're doing is we've wrapped a card inside of a modal, and really you could wrap this modal around anything. So let's come back here. We have our toggle. You click it. Okay, here's the extra purple card, and the close button does not work yet. You'll notice that I don't know why toggle isn't toggling it away. It should be toggling it away as well, but we'll see about that. In fact, even if you wanted to, you could say this this toggle is just setting it to this button. I mean, this should really just set it to be true if we're being entirely honest here. That said, I'm not exactly sure why this isn't doing the thing that I want it to do. But let's go ahead, and what we want to do is we have our is toggled. We also need to get our set toggle in here. Okay, the set toggle is going to be passed into our modal like so. We have our is toggled and our set toggled, and we can access that basically here, our set toggle. And when you click the close button on click, it's going to run a function that's going to simply just set this to false, aka it's going to close it. I'm going to modify the other one, not because I don't want to debug this, but because it honestly makes more sense to just set the toggle to true here, because this is a toggle on rather than a toggle. Okay, so we're going to set this to true, and it's going to turn our modal on, and then we're going to click it again, and it's going to turn our modal off. Click it, and then if we have the close button, we can click the close button, and the close button should in fact be closing this, which is fun because it means that the other one was probably working fine and that there's just something going on here with this animate presence, the fact that we're not using any sort of motion behind here or anything like that. So let's go ahead and solve some of those aspects of this first, okay? What we want to be doing here inside of our modal.js is one, we're going to swap this div out for a motion.div like so. And this motion.div is going to get an initial. And the initial can be something like opacity of 0. And we'll also need some other props in here. We'll need the exit and the animate as well. So I like to duplicate this. This is the way I do it. And then I do animate, and then I do exit, and we can set this to 1. Okay, pretty cool. So now that that's here, let's go ahead and see this in action. Fade in, there we go. Click it, and it actually fades out. So it looks like I was right with that assumption that the toggle was working correctly, but it was something going on with the animate presence and the fact that we didn't have a motion behind it. Okay, so here we have an item, and it fades in, it fades out on the toggle. That's cool, but is this a modal? No, it's not. It's not a modal. So let's go ahead and change that just a little bit here. One thing we can do, we have this card. And so far, we've largely worked with motion.divs. And that's not going to change. But one of the cool things that we haven't done is we haven't necessarily worked on anything where we're toggling more than one motion based on any sort of animated presence or any sort of toggle change. We haven't done it where more than one thing is animating. So it'll be cool to see that we can actually have several different animations going on here. We can nest them and we can do all sorts of fun stuff. For instance, we have this fragment here where this will also become a motion.div. Now, one thing I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be taking these props from this inner div and I'm going to be putting it on this outer div because I want the whole thing to fade in and out, right? Where this motion.div down here, I actually want this one to do something different. I want it to do a change on the Y property like this, okay? So we're going to be animating the Y property and we're going to say, hey, you can start, let's say 50 pixels up, then go to the 0 spot. And then when I close you, maybe go down 30 pixels, okay? So Y. What this is going to do is we're going to now see a multi-layered effect where the card itself is not going to transition in via opacity, but the container of it will. So of course it will, while we additionally get some neat little, translation effects. There we go. Close it. There we go. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So the next step here is going to be to actually give this some style. Now there's a couple ways we could do this. We could create a styled component, or we could just simply give this style here. Now typically I would make this into a styled component, but for this particular case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to say, hey, this thing, we're going to want you to have a position fixed. Should be a string. There we go. Sorry, I'm not used to writing object-based CSS sometimes. It's a little weird for me. I'm always typically writing string-based CSS, whether that's styled components or actual CSS. We're going to say this is going to be in the top, and we'll say, hey, it's like 30 pixels from the top or something. And then the left is going to be 50%. And then we're going to also do a transform. And for our transform, we're going to say translate 3D. And we're going to say -50%, comma, 0, comma, 0. Save this. And let's check this out here. We have our card. We click toggle. There it is. It pops up directly in the center. Close it out and it's gone. Now I'm noticing that it's not really doing the exit animation as I'd like, but it is getting the proper fade out. Now, two things quick before we show you this thing in action, because it is going to, in fact, largely work. There's a little caveat to that. But we do this technique where we're doing -50% here and then a left of 50%. If you have never seen this, what this is simply doing is centering. You could always wrap this in a parent div that's position fixed, 100 width, and do some flexbox stuff to get this going. In fact, that's a totally valid. Or you can just simply throw a left 50% and a transform at -50% on that X property, and that's going to also center it for you. Now, when we see this, we're going to have a very basic modal, and you can click this. Here we go. And the big caveat, the big issue here is that there's still no Y transition on this fade out. Now, that is a little bit of a problem, but not one that is unsolvable. Because what's happening here is that it's only going to be able to do the exit animation of the first child of this animating presence, or if the children are on the same level, let's say we had several of these divs, it would be able to handle those as well as long as they had keys. But it's not going to be able to handle the exit animation in this particular way. Now, to do that, we're going to need to dive into another concept called variance. Now, variants are a very interesting way to orchestrate many animations from one change. And that is something that we're going to spend some significant time on. But for now, we're just going to say, hey, you know what? This exit animation that we wanted here, it's not in the cards for this particular example until we get into the variants category. However, this is how you build a modal. Now, obviously, there is lots of CSS in here that could be done to improve this experience. For instance, we have this toggles on, it's here, it's acting as a modal, it's in the center, it has its own close button, all those fun things. But of course, it's not beautiful. It doesn't, it doesn't exactly work in really tight constraints, so to say. In fact, if we were to continue to increase the size of this, this is just going to increase in size, and that's cool too. But of course, when you make a modal, maybe perhaps you'd want to give it an explicit size or something like that. Either way, all of these fixes are just CSS related and have very little to do with what we're doing with frame or motion, and we're largely going to ignore them. Now, what we're going to be doing in the next video is talking about how to animate height auto. And that is sort of one of the golden things that everyone looks for an animation library to do and always has a hard time with it. In fact, I have never really loved anyone's approach to animating height auto, except for, believe it or not, jQuery's. So we're going to be doing that in this next video, and we're going to be talking about how super cool it is that you can animate height auto by doing another practical example using frame or motion by building an accordion. An animated accordion is something you got to do all the time. So we'll leave this toggle up here, we'll leave this modal up here, and we're going to move on to an accordion in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.